Last month, I asked you to send me your most pressing tabletop RPG related questions, the stuff that you struggle with, the stuff that if, let's say, the creator of D&D answered, it might just help you out a bit. And so I went around asking your questions to the pros, game designers, publishers, artists, etc. People who make a living spending way too much time thinking about this stuff. And with their advice, they'll bring you from never having run a game before to being a GMing machine, fine-tuned to produce legendary games every single week. Let's start with a big one. There's one question I got more than any other, which probably means it's the question that is the most important in your eyes. What's the best way of dealing with self-doubt and imposter syndrome as a GM? How do you formulate ideas for a session and avoid feeling like the ideas aren't good enough? So here's the issue. My understanding from your question is that one day, someone gets up and decides they want to be a GM and gets excited. Then they become a GM and suddenly the anxiety goblin breaks their windows, breaks their kneecaps, spits on them and steals from them the most important treasure they ever had, their self-esteem. They are now left with broken kneecaps, but also a completely empty self-esteem gauge. I can't do anything about the kneecaps, but to try and refill your self-esteem gauge with positive vibes, I asked the professionals.
I think this is a really important question in the age of actual play and a lot of games happening online. And I think what I want to say to everybody is, when Matt Mercer first started GMing, he was not the Matt Mercer you see GMing on Critical Role right now. And I feel so grateful that I got to learn how to GM in an age where it was not on screen and it wasn't being recorded, and I made so many mistakes.
Our first beacon of positivity on our path of becoming a GMing machine is Becky Annison, award-winning designer of the horror game Lovecraftesque. I got to meet her at UK Games Expo, and I think she's the perfect person to ask about GM anxiety for one important reason. Her games are designed as on-ramps to trick your players into realizing that GMing is fun and kind of easy, actually.
So I think the first thing I would say to anybody who's got a bit of self-doubt is, don't hold yourself up to other people's standards. Do what you do and make tons of mistakes, because that's how you're going to learn to be better. And if you're too frightened to make a mistake and get started, then you're never going to be the GM you want to be. And the mistakes don't matter. No one's going to remember those mistakes in 5 minutes' time.
What is this? This warm feeling in my cold, anxious GM heart. Are you starting to feel it too? I need more. More intense positivity.
I think one of the things I've learned over many, many years of role-playing is that pretty much any idea you'll come up with is going to be good enough once it gets to the table. When you're starting, you worry about having to have the absolutely perfect idea for everything. But I think actually once you bring some story ideas to the table and the whole group there gets to play with them and join in, most ideas will turn out okay.
More.
So I think the most important thing for a GM, my advice would be, don't worry about it. I think, you're a player too, you're there to have fun, enjoy the game, and, you're not there to put on a performance for the players. It's a collective endeavor, as you all know.
Okay, it's actually really hard to stay intense when every game designer I meet is the loveliest, most passionate person you've ever met. But they both put their finger on something we tend to forget. Your players are not your judges. They're here to help. When we prep, we're alone in our rooms, overthinking everything, so it's easy to get lost in the sauce. But even if it eventually becomes okay when you're in the middle of a game and everyone's visibly having a good time, what can we do when we're alone, prepping, and we can feel the dreadful gaze of the anxiety goblins staring at us from behind the window? And I could tell you, don't worry all day. But for a lot of people, don't worry is hard to do, and you're still going to look like this on the inside. So, to defeat the anxiety goblin, once and for all, let's ask another goblin.
If you think it needs to be a certain level or something, you make it for someone else and to fulfill someone's expectations, and the love as well won't come through that way. Your excitement for the topic won't come out, it'll seem strained. But I think as long as you're excited about the idea, that's gonna come through no matter what. So I think if you're watching Jujutsu Kaisen or something and you're like, this is so cool, I wish I could play this in the game, you can very easily just slip that in because you'll be excited about it and your excitement will be contagious, and I think that's the best thing to do. Do what is fun because you'll enjoy the work, you'll enjoy playing it, you'll be excited about it, and that will infect your players.
And this is the question I got the most, but that's not actually the only reason why I put it first. I think we needed to go here before we go through all of the nuggets of knowledge that the people I interviewed are about to give you. You see, I used to coach people, and 90% of that was just putting people in the right mindset. If I tried to coach someone who didn't believe in themselves already, they just wouldn't listen to any advice I had for them. Not because they were stubborn or difficult, but because they didn't believe they could implement that advice in the first place. So, first we kick the butt of the anxiety goblin, and now your GMing machine has fuel. Ready to go conquer the world? Yeah, sure. So let's tackle a scary one next. This is a question by Emergent GM. What do you think the most important skill a GM should master? I thought because this question was very broad, I would get a lot of different answers. That's not what happened. Apparently, there is one skill that is very, very important. Because now you're motivated. Cool. Maybe a little too much. Maybe you spend an entire weekend prepping a cool murder mystery with a lumberjack who turned into a werewolf. And then your players hear you talk about that waterfall that you just put there because it sounded cool. And that's what they want to check out. And now you're panicking. Oh no. So, what are you missing here?
I think, for me, I would say be flexible. Your players are going to do things that you're not going to expect. Being comfortable with being flexible with the story is an important skill. They give your players something to debate, something that your players are going to disagree over and make them think about. Moral conundrums, because they then spend ages thinking about what the right answer might be, and the players get really involved and really love it. Be comfortable with being flexible and going off script. Don't worry about it. And present situations that are going to make your players scratch their heads and have a debate amongst themselves about what's the best way forward.
And Dave Semark here would know what he's talking about, because on top of working for Free League, he literally won the award for Best Role-Playing Game of the Year that morning for his work on Tales of the Old West. And like I said, he was not the only one to mention this.
When I was in the development process of Monster a Week, what I would do for those games would be sit down for half an hour and come up with a mystery the day before the game session.
This is Michael Sands, and he literally wrote the book on how to be flexible as a GM. So how does he manage to write a mystery in half an hour exactly?
I think it's partly too the thinking about clues a different way, because if you look at things like Call of Cthulhu, it tends to say, in a published scenario, there'll be there is this clue found here. Whereas I think for the sort of mystery that Monster of the Week has, where it's more about following them along as they solve it rather than puzzling it out, the idea that the keeper knows what's going on and the clues the hunters find are the clues that they would find because of what you know's happened or is happening.
I think what's important in Michael's answer is, beyond stressing about how important it is to be flexible, he tells you to think about how you can organize your prep so that you'll be more flexible at the table. It's something that takes an active step from you, but once you do it, you can be way more responsive to what happens in the game. So for example, instead of writing down, in the lumberjack's cabin there's a claw mark that indicates the presence of a werewolf, which is not very flexible, you can have your prep just say, problem, there's a werewolf, and if your players decide to look behind the waterfall, you can trust your future self to come up with a clue that makes sense for that location, like maybe tufts of wet fur on the riverbank. And once your prep is structured like this, it allows you to way more easily use a bunch of other cool techniques. Like a really neat one that Avery Alder told me. She's designed a bunch of games like Monsterhearts and The Quiet Year, but she got that tip from another game called The Mountain Witch.
And it's often referred to as the Mountain Witch trick. Whenever a player asks you something, turn that question back on them. So if they say okay, once we get through that door into the inner sanctum chamber, what do we see? As the GM, you can just say, I don't know. What do you see? And the first couple times that you try this, the players will be confused, and you just have to push through that confusion, because once they get into the habit of answering those questions, then you as the GM no longer have to have the answers. You just have to lob in questions, like you're lobbing in a grenade just to see what blows up.
But while we're on flexibility, is there such a thing as taking it too far? Because, cool, yeah, you got your confidence back and you've mastered the important skill of being flexible. You start to realize the power within your grasp. As the GM, you are a builder of world. You summon entire sessions with 2 bullet points, improvise mountains into existence and create life with every word. Is this power? Maybe let's chill a bit and learn about a magical word. Restraint. It's the difference between flexibility and sloppiness. So I have a question from Tanya, a bunch of numbers. When is the rule of cool a cool thing, and when is it just destroying the game?
People really like black and white answers on the internet, and this is not going to be black or white. Context is all going to be dependent, you know.
This very nuanced individual is Taran Pounds, aka Indestructiboy, designer of the Vagabond pulp fantasy TTRPG. And he's right, I'm a big fan of the rule of cool, but I've also heard a lot of people say it takes away from the stakes of the game if every single rule can be broken just because the GM feels like it. So, where do we stop?
If somebody's saying something like, my character's gonna do a flip and then attack this guy, that's like, okay, literally no different than if they had just walked up to them, right? Like, it's literally you're moving the same speed on the map. It's not really giving you an advantage, it's just them kind of painting something fun in their head. However, if it's a thing like, you know, I'm a character who wants to feel like a badass, so DM, let me one-shot this Tarrasque with a cantrip because I want to feel that power fantasy that you promised. The thing that's cool is overcoming this great challenge here, you know, that's wangroddery.
So, flexibility is power, yes, but that power is still bound by a very important force in the universe, the social contract at your table. It's a slippery slope to your players losing all trust in you. So how do we avoid that? Let's hear from Mr. Rule of Cool himself, Evan Diaz, the creator of the Nimble TTRPG.
If my fun is coming at the expense of someone else's fun, then it has gone too far. But if it's something that we as a party are all doing together, and it's going to be our cool memory, then it happens. Or at least we'll roll the dice and see if it happens. So just because it's cool doesn't mean you can do it, but if it is actually cool and it makes everybody else's fun more, then I would say absolutely go for it.
We've got 6 questions and 10 guests left to meet, but before we get to that, I have a pretty big thing to announce. What? No, I'm not having a baby Modron. For the past 2 months, those of you on my Patreon might have noticed a bit of a change. I have been posting a bunch of free stuff like the Blood Magic Barbarian subclass or a collection of 15 pirate ship battle maps, and a bunch of Patreon exclusive stuff like bonus videos or a compendium of fun encounters that involve using the Tarrasque in unexpected ways. And that's just what's new since last video, but I'm posting new stuff like this every single week. Basically, when I started this Patreon, it was really just a tip jar, and people were kind enough to support this channel for nothing in return, but now I want to give back, and so my Patreon has become a big library of resources. So come check this out so I can feel good about the amount of time I've been spending on this and continue to not take sponsors. Okay, back to the interview. Part 4, world building. One of my favorite questions that I've got was this one from Squish the Fish. How far do you go with world building? Specifically, how do you know when to stop? How much is too much? When do you start risking to waste a bunch of your work?
As a long-time GM, I can tell you that it's really, really easy to get lost in world building. And I've seen a lot of people that they get excited for it, which is great, and then they end up building so much so early that they get burnt out, or they get disappointed when their players don't engage with like every little bit of detail.
This is Maru, lead writer for Loot Tavern, the overachievers behind Ryoko's, Heliana's, and a bunch of other multi-million-dollar Kickstarters that are known for going deep on world building. So he definitely knows where to find the balance, and here's one technique he uses that I don't think people realize how much of an impact it makes.
So I think it's really useful to get like the big picture of your world, the deities, the factions, the continents, whatever, but players respond very well to the small-scale stuff. It's almost more important to work out who's going to be in that tavern, all the NPCs that are going to be in that tavern that your players can interact with. So it's important to like pace yourself and not go too overboard so you lose your enthusiasm, and just kind of work with what your players are interested in.
So basically, the opposite of what Past Me did for his first campaign, where I gave my players an end-of-the-world prophecy on the 3rd session that involved 6 different gods. Bad Modron. Yeah, the incidents that ensued might be why I called this one of my favorite questions. And so I asked the same question to another game designer whose world building looks like this.
I find when you have games with a lot of lore, though that can be cool, it can be quite overwhelming as well, where you're worrying that maybe you're going to make a mistake, you're going to get the lore wrong. So I like games that are a bit more abstract on it, that have like an unreliable narrator. Salvage Union is a post-apocalyptic game, so there's a degree of history being lost, and that then gives players and the GMs an ability to change that lore, adapt it, and make it up themselves because there's not like an authoritative source. So I prefer that approach to world building.
That's honestly a great tip, because over world building is very, very tempting. But if you set yourself up like this, discovering the world building together at the same time as your players becomes a built-in feature of your game. You hint at there being more than meets the eye, but you don't have to actually develop anything that does not meet the eye. And then you get to be just as surprised as your players when you realize that there is actually a god of ice cream. Now, as GMs, we control a lot of things. The world building, the rule of cool, etc. But there is one thing that's forever hopelessly outside of our control. What our stupid players do. Just kidding, I love these idiots, but sometimes it takes a bit of wrangling to get them to act in a way where they don't end up ruining their own fun. Which leads me to the next question by Tisdejong, a bunch of numbers. What would you say is a great way to get players to interact with one another rather than just with the GM?
So my favorite tool is during session 0, use some kind of character connection or bonds system. So if you're not familiar with this, this is something you'll find in games like Band of Blades or Scum and Villainy. It's in Court of Blades, and Daggerheart uses this as well, right? A thing that I'm very familiar with. In Daggerheart, each of the character classes has connection questions that you're encouraged to ask on behalf of your character to another character. This does a few different things. You're getting the players to already start thinking on the level of co-storyteller on how to connect their player character to other player characters, which then gives each of these players kind of a starting point or an initial dynamic for them to bounce off of when they are interacting with the other characters in the group. It also helps you get over that you all meet in a tavern kind of situation where the players are just getting to know their characters and they don't really have any sense of what the relationships between the other characters are, right? Giving them something to start from makes it a little bit easier for them to, 1, already be thinking in those terms, and 2, build off of something rather than having to create rapport from 0.
And yet, you cannot have a dramatic heart-to-heart with your long-lost sibling if none of the other players are your long-lost siblings. They're just a bunch of randos you met in a bar last week. And now that you've tricked your players into talking with one another, let's think about something a lot less dramatic and a lot more pragmatic. Punching stuff. And oh boy, so many of you asked me about combat, which means I have so many tips from so many game designers about combat, and they all touch on completely different stuff. I think it's because combat is such an important part of D&D that people want to get it right, but everyone is struggling with a slightly different part of it. So let's start from the beginning. We're going to punch something. Cool, but how do we make it something interesting and evocative?
One is how the monster is tied into the world or the story of the session or the game. It's one thing to have a ghost bear as a threat stat block, but if you call that ghost bear a specific name that is drawn from the legends of that village that it's terrorizing, then suddenly that monster has meaning that grounds it in the fiction. And the other angle is how the monster telegraphs its danger, how it threatens the players. I think the best example of this is the Roper, my favorite D&D monster, where it pulls you with these really long tentacles from the darkness, right? You don't know where it is and it's pulling you. And even if you've never encountered a Roper before, you know a monster pulling you slowly into the darkness is bad. That immediately helps jumpstart evocation.
I think if you take like a sort of typical boss creature and if you give it one thing that is different than the standard one, it often goes a long way to just sort of take the whole encounter and like spruce it up. And when we were playing yesterday, one of the creatures you fought was a dragon who breathed like incandescent breath. As soon as you find that one thing, you take everything and you point it at it. You go, when he prepares to breathe his breath weapon, it is incandescent, so it lights up in multiple colors.
Okay, we now have a cool creature. Now we need a cool map. Or do we? Some people like battle maps, some people like theater of the mind. How do you balance the two?
For me, I do a little bit of everything. If it's just a small, simple encounter while they're on the way to somewhere else, then that'll be theater of the mind. If it's a big, epic, end of a year-long campaign, I'm probably getting some minis, some minis over here, and I'm painting them, I'm putting like a cool set together with some interactable things. So I think how important the encounter is how much time I'll spend on it. But just thinking about, is this throwaway encounter worth me spending like 5 hours painting a bunch of minis on? Maybe, maybe not. A very tactical encounter, if it's more of a cool story beat, because once you get out the grid, then people's role-playing brains sometimes turn off, and then they're only thinking about, okay, here's my character sheet and this and this and this and rolling dice, and not really interacting with the story as much. It shouldn't be that way, but it often is.
Cool, so we have set up for a cool combat with a cool creature on a cool map or in your very cool imagination. Now we just need to run it in a cool way. So here's one thing not to do and one thing to do instead.
For me, the thing that irks me the most, specifically in combat, is when you have creatures or animals that just move forward and hit the players, and then the players hit them back, and you just exchange blows until the creature dies. That's something that real animals don't do. And I feel like it's much more interesting if the animals behave in a way that is more realistic, more fitting of what they would actually do in real life. A lot of animals would run away when they start getting injured, or beforehand they would do intimidation displays to try and ward off attackers. I like to have creatures move around each other, reposition, and behave before fighting immediately. Even if you don't have an exchange of blows, it doesn't mean that the encounter is wasted or boring. You can still do lots of dynamic and interesting stuff with creatures, but the thing that is always the most boring, I find, is the creature moves up, it hits someone, they hit it back, and you just repeat that process.
In the Nimble Game Master Guide, actually there is a whole spread of, I think it's like, 30 or 40 unique encounters that you can have. There's, traps, and this is one where you're trying to push people off a cliff's edge, and other ones where the enemies are illusions and that kind of thing. So I would just say have like a table or a sticky note inside your GM screen that says, 1d6, here's a few different alternate things. And if it's there, then maybe you'll use that kind of thing more often. Just being reminded that that kind of encounter is an option, I think will take you most of the way there of having encounters that are not just knockdown drag-outs.
So this was combat. Let's move on to the next question by DM Dungeon Mastery, which is, what is your go-to method for mapping out a dungeon? Where do you start? How do you start? Do you pre-plan all of the rooms in advance, or do you draw the dungeon out first, then populate it with content? And yeah, as a GM, there's nothing worse than blank page syndrome. The feeling that you're motivated and you want to run a cool game, but your brain is constipated and nothing will come out. So I asked two people who could be called experts on the topic of dungeons.
I think there's a couple different approaches to this. I think if I'm a DM trying to run one, like make one for my home world, the story is a factor in there, and that's context that I usually factor in when we're making a dungeon.
This goes back to the idea that restrictions breed creativity. It's good to remember that within a campaign, you're never really creating a dungeon in a vacuum. So hopefully, by the time you get to the point where you're mapping out a dungeon, you know a couple things about that dungeon already. Some antagonists, some background info, etc. So you put those on the page and it becomes about simply filling in the blanks, rather than about trying to conjure up ideas from the void by sacrificing babies to the god of creativity. So here's another restriction you can give yourself to get even more creative.
I try to think of like, what new thing am I throwing out there? What is this dungeon doing that's different? Sometimes a gimmick can do that, and then from around there I'm thinking thematically what kind of supports the gimmick, what might explain it. I think that a lot of creativity comes out of that in like trying to think of what have I not seen before and how can I achieve that.
Hey, hold on, did you pick up on something just now? This is the second time we've heard this word, gimmick. Dadi mentioned it earlier when talking about how to make a monster stand out, and now Taran mentions it in the context of dungeon design. And I think there's a very good reason for that. The word gimmick sounds pejorative, but it's what makes the difference between a dungeon that's just boring stone walls and even more boring goblins, and one that looks like this. And I also got Mr. Dungeon himself to weigh in on how to avoid blank page syndrome.
I don't try now to make it like super interesting. I'll just draw boxes with lines between them. Because I also find sometimes just getting it drawn is like the big first step. And so I find sometimes it helps to iterate with that. Like just start by making something really rough, then start developing your story, your encounters, then start thinking about, hey, how can I adjust the dungeon?
As someone whose entire job is to stare at a blank page all day, I hate to say it, but yes, you can force yourself to put something on the page. Anything. And then, no matter what, you run with it. Because once you get started, That's when you get to use all of the fun, creativity and productivity techniques we've talked about today. Techniques like this next one, which is one of my favorites.
So one thing I like to do now is when I'm creating a dungeon, I like to leave about a third of the rooms sort of quote-unquote empty, but instead I'll put in hints or events that point to other things that are going on in the dungeon. So I was running in my Forgotten Realms campaign, the players in this dungeon, and there are these gorgons running around. There's also these Zentarum agents that are in the dungeon. And so throughout the dungeon, I just have statues of Zentarum agents the players are coming across, because the Gorgons have turned them to stone.
And the reason I love this answer is the same reason why I can never shut up about Skyrim and Fallout. These games are amazing at environmental storytelling, and while Mike describes those rooms as empty, if you walk into a room and this is what you see, as a player, you're never going to describe this room as empty. Our next question is from David Santos, bunch of numbers. And he wanted to ask about the OSR. You know, this whole genre of games where your character's name is their entire backstory because you know they're going to die about 3 times per session on average. So David asks, how do you justify constantly introducing replacements in the middle of a dungeon? And I asked this to the pirate wizard, Limithron, designer of PirateBorg.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this. My first is that in PirateBorg, it doesn't really matter because you always have a crew. It's easy to become one of the crew members that you didn't really realize, or you pick them up in a new port. But the real answer is that you have to remember that you're playing a game and people are there to have fun. So if the narrative doesn't make perfect sense, it's you can bend it a little bit. Oh yes, they're prisoners, or oh, they were chained up, or they come running in, or they're another adventuring party that you run into, or a trapped dungeoneer. The most important thing is to get the player back into the game and make sure everybody's having fun, because while narrative is important, fun is more important.
And I love this answer because I know that's what stops a lot of people from trying OSR games in the first place. So by having a bunch of examples of how an OSR GM would handle this situation, it can maybe help you try something new. Speaking of, our final question, by Gabriel, probably his password, is how do you think we can make trying out new systems more appealing to our players and less like homework?
I think a lot of people come to this from the idea of learning D&D 5e and feeling like every RPG is going to be just as overwhelming as it was to kind of learn D&D 5e. And quite honestly, it's just not really the case. D&D 5e is actually one of the crunchiest systems out there in the world right now. I think you're going to find that learning a game is not incredibly overwhelming. Something like Markborg is going to be a 10 to 15 minute kind of a thing.
So, step 1. Don't worry, every game designer featured in this video knows that they don't have the first mover advantage like D&D does. Everything they write is written for human consumption, which is going to help you out as a human. Once you have picked a game, Taran gives us a simple 2-step process to learning it.
Number 1, the most important thing to know is knowing the resolution mechanic. So by that I mean if you hear something like it's a D20 based system or it's a D6 dice pool system, knowing how that operates is honestly the most important thing. Once you know that, the rest of the system should kind of just build off of that in some form or fashion. Once you know that, I would go through the process of making a character, because making a character will teach you even more about the system, and I honestly think a lot of systems will teach themselves just by making a character.
And that's about all of the questions I could put in this video without it being an hour long. But I gotta say, talking with all of these people, it is fuel for the soul. If you haven't walked a convention floor yourself, the way I would describe it is that I didn't really realize how lonely this hobby felt until it didn't anymore. Being surrounded by people who share this passion, it's what bridges the gap between you prepping a game alone in your room and you feeling like you're actually part of an actual community. And since the last question was about trying out new games, here's a video to help you figure out which one might be right for you. Because these designers just showed us the huge variety in styles of TTRPG, and so I made the same dungeon in 4 different games to showcase that variety. And you can click here to watch it. And super special thanks to my Patreon members who keep the lights on and are the only reason I can make this type of over-ambitious video with 15 different guests. As a way to say thanks, they will get the full uncut interviews on Patreon. Okay, bye!